Hello, and welcome to the UnWokable podcast. I am your host, Mark Owsley, and today I am joined by Jenni White, the head of ROPE, Reclaim Oklahoma Parent Empowerment group here, who has been working for years and years. Jenni has been working for years and years on education issues, has a great knowledge of the history and the current happenings going on in education as it comes as it well, really anything education. I've learned a lot from her. You can find her on her ROPE website. I would encourage you to go look for that, and we'll talk more about that later. But Jenni, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for asking me.
Yes, I'm interested in what you have to say. And as I'll have said to my audience before, I want to give everybody the most information possible, because information is how you make the best decisions. And so I brought Jenni on to talk about school choice. And as my audience knows, I've had some issues with school choice, and Jenni does as well. And so I want to hear I want to hear your opinions on that. And let's just start at the ground level. Why are you, Jenni, against school choice?
Because I hate children.
Oh, gosh, well, that's easy. Podcast over. No.
Done.
Yeah.
No, but that's what it ends up. They end up making it that it always becomes this, emotional issue that doesn't really have anything to do in facts. And of course, that's how we know that people work anymore. You get people all spooled up saying emotional stuff, and then all of a sudden their brain stops working and there are no more facts involved. And I think school choice, they've particularly made the term to sound wonderful without a real definition. And that's, I think, what ends up, because if you say school choice, well, come on, we're Republicans. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be big market people. We like choice. I mean, it's extremely hard then to get past the choice part, because everybody says, well, choice is good. What's the matter with you? You don't like choice? So they've done you say this all the time on your podcast, words have meanings. Mm-hmm. And I used to be in advertising. When I first started out my whole life, I was in advertising, and advertising is great because you learn what words are going to tweak the mind, and you use those words to do just that. And I think that's part of the reason why they use this term school choice, because how can you not be for choice? Well, if you're not for choice, you hate kids. I mean, it's a perfect setup. But school choice is a huge umbrella, really, and it's how parents want to educate their kids. So it could be a public school, it could be a private school, it could be a home school, it could be a charter school, it could be any school would fit under school choice, right? Because school and choice. Mm-hmm. But I think the nefarious plan here is that this school choice umbrella underneath it, and it encompasses something called vouchers. And a voucher is taking public money, which is tax dollars, and inserting it over here into a private school. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to talk specifically about vouchers. So they use the big umbrella, school choice, because that's what makes it sound really good.
Well, let me play devil's advocate. Jenni, that's not government money. That's the people's money. So why are you against the people using their own money for their own process, for their own choice in school? Because it is taxpayer funded money, right? It is.
The government has no money other than what they take from us, right? And right. It's true. So I guess that's where I differ with a lot of people, is that if you're going to be accosted by a robber in a parking lot and they're going to put a gun in your face and say, give me all your money, when he leaves, what does he have? your money. You don't have anything left. He's going to
Yeah.
go do whatever he wants to do with it. Well, unfortunately, I see the government as the robber in the parking lot and people get upset about that and they say, well, that's not true. It is. You have property taxes and income taxes. Property taxes fund public education. And in part, because public education is funded by plenty of sources, but we get it on property taxes. Now, let me ask you, Mark, what happens if you don't pay your property taxes?
You go to jail.
Well, they'll totally take your home away from you and sell it on the market for pennies just to make sure your tax lien is satisfied, correct?
Yes. Yep.
I would call that force. Would you call that force?
Yes.
Okay. So what happens if you don't pay your income tax?
They will clear your bank accounts, and if it's too much, they'll send you to jail. Just ask Wesley Snipes.
Bingo.
Yep.
So that sounds like force to me too. I mean, taxes aren't benevolently given by taxpayers. They're taken from us by force. And once the government has those funds, and here's the trick, government is not a bank. You can't deposit funds in the government and then say, okay, I'm cashing out my funds for this. Let me have them and I'll go take them someplace else. The government is not a bank. The government takes the money that they take from us and they translate it into services, public education, roads and bridges, fill in the blank. Well, if they translate it into services, then the money goes into that, right? They're not a bank. I can't go take, and say, here, I want my money back for this. Because let's face it, the amount of property tax that I pay, I think we're around $2,600 or $2,900 I pay in property taxes a year to fund schools. Well, if you took that money, which is taxpayer money, right? If you took that, it's not going to fund any kids' private education, right? So all of this, there have to be other sources that come together for you, because I think at one point in time, we talked about, I think there was a study done that said in Oklahoma, we're between $10,000 and $13,000 a kid. That's how the education funding breaks down, is that per child, it's between 10 and 13. And that's been some years ago. So I'm going to assume it's higher than that. Okay. Well, so if it's $13,000 to educate a child, then it can't just come from my property taxes. It's got to come from numerous different sources to pay that bill. Do you follow where I'm going with that? So it's a whole bunch of different taxpayer funds in the one pot.
Right. It's a cocktail.
Yes. So now let's say that I take that money somehow through a voucher. The government, who is always here to help us, right, hands us these funds that they've stolen from us and say, here, you can use these now for a private education for your child, because the schools that we have contributed your money to aren't meeting your needs and they're terrible. So we're going to give you other money, or take this money out of that and then put it into something else. Well, any of us are going to want to know where that money goes. It's called accountability. So if you give this money to a private school and that private school says, thank you, we're going to take little Johnny and he's going to come here and go to school. Well, how do we know that that school is actually paying for that child's education? Well, we have, as taxpayers, we need to know. So if we are going to expect that private school to have accountability for the money that they spend, they're going to have to report to the state. You would agree with that?
Yeah. We
know, because there's a Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarship, which is really a voucher. And we know that private schools who take this voucher money have to sign on to agreements from the state.
Okay, real quick, just unpack what the Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarship is for the audience here.
Okay, so the Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarship is a voucher for children who have special needs, any kind of special need, to be able to send them to a school that is better suited to their special need.
Okay, so when you have they defined the term special need?
Yeah, I lost you in the.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
We're having problems with internet connection.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay. Have they defined the term special need?
That's really a good question, because I'd have to go back and look at that, and I'm not sure. Oh, that's a good question.
Well, see, because here's the thing about terms like special needs, because when you think about, let's say, example, SEL, right? If you have a child that we all think of, this is a situation called concept creep. Okay, so if you have a term like special needs, we have always thought about that as a designation to apply to children who have a mental deficiency that is drastic, right? Well, if you're now making SEL, you're pushing SEL and saying that kids have anxiety problems, or they have behavioral problems, you're constantly expanding that term of special needs. That now, if you're giving that scholarship or a voucher to kids with special needs, but you're expanding the definition of special needs, then you're expanding the number of kids who will be getting that under this program that's happening now that they call a scholarship. And so it's just something to think about when you're putting Republicans or conservatives, when you're thinking about language in bills and they put things like special needs, it needs to be defined in the law to be something very static. It cannot be something that's expanded. There needs to be a definition to the word or the term special needs if you don't want the left or the middle right to come in and then expand that program out, because they're going to use that language to do it. So it's just that's an interesting point to make here, because I think that's the same point that Jenny was making with the term school choice. School choice is now, it's this umbrella term that covers all of these specific policies. And if, from what I've seen in the state of Oklahoma, if anyone tries to chip away at one of those specific policies, especially, or compromise or make better or any part of that, they will come at you with everything they've got, because school choice is a very specific policy prescription that they don't want to identify, because if you identify any one of the specific policies, the public's probably going to be against it, or at least a larger portion of it. Now, we can argue the merit of those policies, but this marketing standpoint of what Jenny's talking about here, of school choice or anything like that, has been used to pull the wool over the eyes of people so they don't look at the specific policies.
Yes.
So, but okay, so we're at the scholarship. That's you're saying that is a voucher program, but it's limited at this point to children of special needs, whatever that may be.
Correct.
Defined. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
So, but we do know, because it's in state law, exactly when private schools sign on to the program to take kids in this program, they have to meet these certain things. Like, for example, they have to meet civil rights, federal civil rights law. Okay. Now, what's interesting is, in the case of the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship, there does not seem to be at this point in time anything other than that particular that every school has to follow federal civil rights law. And but it's an interesting, that particular thing was a very interesting thing. federal civil rights law actually comes in two separate parts. And one of them is just specifically, you cannot discriminate racially. It's just racial discrimination. You just simply can't discriminate racially.
Right.
But then there's a second part to that, which is that you can't discriminate against sexual, gender, all of that kind of thing. That was
Title IX.
Yes. So that was put in by Obama originally, and then knocked out by Trump, and then reinstated again by Biden.
And just expanded this last week by the Biden administration as well, correct?
I believe so, because I haven't been paying that much attention, but I did remember hearing something about that. So at one point, Joy Hoffmeister said that the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship schools, the ones taking the voucher, now had to allow boys and girls bathrooms essentially, and they had to, do the things that President Obama had said. Well, the state board of education actually voted to change that policy, which would have affected private Christian schools who didn't sign on for that, right? Because that wouldn't have been their modus operandi, isn't dealing with gender issues. They would have signed on saying, no, we're not going to discriminate racially. That's not okay. We're not okay with that. But they wouldn't have signed on to this other part. Well, what it inevitably ended up happening was Mike Hunter had to step in and give I've forgotten what they call it when the attorney general, an opinion. He had to give an opinion that basically said that no, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 doesn't have anything to do with the gender policy. And so no, Superintendent Hoffmeister, you can't force this on private schools. But and so it was stopped. But my point still remains the same. Lots of people have said to me, well, you can't complain, because my complaint about sending public school into a private solution is that this public money now makes this a public solution. So here's my public money, here's my private solution. So this public money comes in and it just eventually takes over the private solution, and now it's all public. They say to me, no, that's not going to happen, because there are things in place where we're going to craft laws that will keep that from happening. And this administration is strong, and that's never going to happen. And then I'm accused of the slippery slope fallacy. Well, it's a slippery slope, and you're just saying that this will happen. It happened in Oklahoma with the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship Voucher Program.
Let me address.
Hunter stepped in and made an opinion and made them stop. It already happened.
Well, here's the thing. I want to address the slippery slope fallacy, okay? And I'm going to do it from the standpoint of all Republicans. Republicans are pro-federalism, small government.
Supposedly.
Right. Well, but I'm going to take them at their argument, what I've been told. Okay. And federalism is built on incentives. Correct. That's if you read the Federalist Papers, that's what they talk about, is that the structure of the federal government as related to the states is they keep each other in check based upon their conflicting incentives. Right. And then they measure those. Slippery slopes occur when you start stacking incentives in a certain direction. And I call it so instead of a slippery slope, it's a stacked incentives. So let's go up the other way, right? And what happened here is that, okay, you've now lured private schools into this pilot program, this scholarship program. I don't know how long has this been happening, the scholarship?
Oh, gosh, I honestly,
Longer than 2 or 3 years?
I'm gonna say 7 years, 8
Okay, great.
years. I mean, it was under Brad Henry that it was
Okay.
started.
Okay, so you caught them. And I'm sure at the beginning, it wasn't just this deluge of private schools that was willing to take this government
Right.
money, right? But over time, you get more and more, oh, this is fine. Okay. And then you change in administrations, you change, things go forward. Progressivism progresses.
Correct.
That's what it does. It's
Yeah.
by definition, it can't not progress, and it's always progressing one direction, always. And so what happens is now you have a large portion of these private schools that over time have said, okay, now, and I would imagine that there has been and this is a speculation on my part, but I'm going to make a guess and we'll see if it's right. There's been an expanding at the same time of the definition of what special needs can be. And equity is a perfect way to do that, just in general, the kind of the way that they talk about that, because their whole saying about equity can be, some kids need more than others, right? And some kids, and this is true, and it has a base foundational truth to it, but wrapped around it is a whole bunch of lies.
Well,
But
it always starts with a kernel of truth.
right, because that's the most convincing lie. But yes, the kids come out, not every kid has the same income level or the same access to internet or whatever it may be, right? So, but that's talking about, going back to my point, stacked incentives goes like this. These schools have now, more of them are taking part of this program, this scholarship program. Now, that's an incentive, right? The government money is an incentive for the private schools to take it because it helps secure the bottom line, right? Now,
Absolutely.
then you get a federal government administration like the Biden administration, the Obama administration, or whatever goes in, and comes in and changes the definitions of what it means to be a private, or what it means to be inclusionary, if you want to use that word, what it means to be non-discriminatory. So they've expanded the word of what discrimination means, or whatever that may say. And now you're stacking an incentive against the private school because they built a lot of their, or at least a portion of their budget money, on money that's coming from the school or from the state. And stacked incentives appear in many different ways, okay? And what this is, how this manifests itself is that now these private schools have a baseline of their budget that is now reliant upon taking money from the government. And the federal government has now come in behind it and changed the definition of the law that undergirded what it was that required them to be able to take that money. And so now there's an incentive, and this is what I mean by stacked. Now the schools have an incentive to buy into what the federal government is saying in order for them to take the money, right? And it only takes, Joy Hoffmeister tried it, okay? Yes, there was a attorney general who stood up against it, thank the Lord, okay? There was a governor who would probably not go for it at that point, great. But at some point on a long enough timeline, they're gonna get you. And this is what the left means when they coined this term way back in the 1960s, the long march to the institutions.
Yeah.
And they nickel and dime you, and they progress you. And that's why the slippery slope fallacy is not a fallacy. And you've had these fallacies come about. If you go back to what the classical fallacies are, I don't think that's included. It was added in, and you can quote, I'm not sure, but I'll go back and check but even still, these just act like nothing happened. It's okay. Even still, these fallacies, they're not a fallacy if you can verify them objectively.
Okay, fair enough.
And that's the thing. Don't let the term fallacy stop you from thinking. Okay. But try to falsify yourself. But if you can objectively verify it, don't let the terminology, whether it's systemic racism, anti-racism, you know, any, you know, school choice, don't let the term stop you from thinking about the details. And so that, I think this undergirds what you were saying about your problem with school choice, is that we're now taking a giant leap down you call it a sticky slope if you want, whatever you want to call it. We're taking a giant leap down the progressive road that every step makes it harder to back up. And so would you agree with that assessment? Is what I'm saying making sense?
No, completely. And I think the other thing, one of the things that the progressives have done just so well over time is to convince people that public education was an entitlement. Because and this goes back 50, almost 100 years, maybe 80 years of just telling people that public education, because people today, all they think about is public education because we've been propagandized and moved in that direction, right? They don't understand that originally education was a private matter that was done inside the home with parents. And usually they taught them out of the Bible, and that was pretty much what they got. Now, later on, and in some cases with some parents, they would pay tutors to come in and tutor their children. And so a tutor would do that. Again, it's still a private matter. The state was not involved. Then what ended up happening was when, the West was really, moving out, they would get communities together and put a building together because most of these people were poor and there weren't tutors around, right? So to just hire, that's not how the West was won, dragging private tutors along, So what they would do is they would take the church that was in the community and they would hold school in that church, and every member of the community would contribute, to helping to pay the teacher's salary. Okay. So that's kind of where, but it didn't really matter at that point in time because it was a very small community. The parents were, absolutely involved in everything that was going on. But they took that model and begin to expand upon that model. Well, now we need to include the kids in the next town over. Well, now we need to include the kids in this town over. So the model, just like you were talking about, grew expansively to the point where people, and you, without getting into huge conspiracy theory, the people that wanted public education because they knew they could propagandize children into believing certain things, set up the Teachers College, John Dewey at the Teachers College in Columbia, and began churning out, like you talk about all the time, higher education, churning out teachers who were going to go in and be able to train these little kids into being automatons. And nobody ever thought anything about it because it's the frog in the boiling pot. Right? Oh, it doesn't matter if we add this. Oh, it doesn't matter if we do this, right? Until we have this huge, I can't even gesticulate properly to get this in the frame. We have this huge system that is based on nothing but incentives. I mean, it's really nothing but incentives. People are using it as a money-making device. It's not for children. It's a two-pronged thing. It's to make money. Oh my gosh, I can invent this program and sell it to this school for $300,000. I can make this program and sell it. Oh, I want to do sell. Let's sell a program about sell. It's all about money. It's not about kids. And it's all about propagandizing, which is, again, not about kids. So we have a giant institution that we've been propagandized into believing is a good thing for kids that is in no way a good thing for kids. but yet you talk against it on any level, and they will call you racist. They will say you're a horrible person because poor people we need to have educated kids. It's the level of propaganda. I don't know how you can.
Well, I will tell you this: the message behind it reminds me of woke arguments. That it's either you agree, Kendi's message on critical race theory or social justice, whatever you want to call it, right, is predicated on a Kafka trap. It's either you are racist or you're against racism. You can't be not racist. You see the same thing with school choice. It's either you're pro-government school or your school choice, and there's no in between.
That's correct.
That is, I declare eternal hostility against every manipulation on the mind of man. And that is a manipulation on the mind of man. Because,
well put, yeah.
Well, that's Thomas Jefferson. That is what's on the wall of the Jefferson Memorial. And you got to understand something about, let me just get on a Jefferson kick for a second. Jefferson was he started the first university, and he was pro public school, but this is back in the late 1800s, late 1700s, and his idea, and he said specifically, he was one of the first boards of regents of his members of the board of regents of the University of Virginia, and he said the university has a direct responsibility to teach things that undergird the foundations of the U.S. Constitution first. Right. And because it is if it is supported by the people, then it must represent the not necessarily the will of the people, but the foundations of the idea that built the institution itself. And so getting back to the attack on the mind of man is that if you're put into a dichotomous choice, a binary choice, for which there's no deviation allowed, you cannot then be a thinking person.
You can't have a discussion. It's either this or that.
Right. Yeah, but if you're pejorativized, if you're taken in, and planted in this group, and that's happening to me right now, they're having a difficult time because my channel is called UnWokable. They all agree that wokeism is racism because it is. Yeah. It is racist discrimination going the opposite direction. It is racist discrimination in the name of equity. It is to engineer outcomes. They have a very difficult time calling me from the right racist because I built my entire following on the fact that I can literally dissect this kind of argument. And so that is my problem with the school choice lobby at this point, is that you're using terms that are designed to mislead people on the right using right language. Let me ask you this question. I want you to play devil's advocate for me for a second. Jenny, how is freedom from government schools achieved by injecting money from the government into private schools?
Do I have to play devil's?
Well, I want you to for a second, because let's play, and I'm going to let you then argue your own point. So because here's the thing, and I want to say this right now before and Jenny, how about you ask me that, and I'll play devil's advocate.
I think that's better because
that's
can't
fine.
Literally come up with anything. Okay,
well, I can, because I know the talking points. Well, they can't answer that question. But I want to say this. I've invited Corey DeAngelis on the show. I've invited a lot, and that's the only name I'm going to name right now. But I've invited lots of school choice advocates on my show to talk about this openly. And this isn't to raise my stature. Okay. James Lindsay has 300,000 followers, and Corey DeAngelis has 100,000. Him coming on my show is not going to give me this giant boost. Okay. I want to have an open discussion that cannot be put off into one way or the other. I want to have a long form, non-talking point related discussion on these issues, and they refuse to talk to me. and they refused to argue with me. They were even online on Twitter. So
Well,
I
might
don't think they, I
suggest
don't think,
why?
huh?
Might I suggest why?
Sure.
Because this is about money. It's not about kids. And let me ask you this question.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you're American Federation for Children, which Corey DeAngelis works for, and you raise $8 million, usually it's just the DeVos family who runs American Federation for Children. They run that. And usually it's just them, because I've looked at their 990s. So it's just them usually giving money. But the point of the matter is this. So you have a national organization, National Federation for Children, okay? You have a budget of $8 million a year. Now, let me ask you, how many schools could that open for kids? How many direct scholarships could that provide for children to go to private school? I'm just curious, because do you know what that money goes for, Mark?
What's that?
It goes to help people win elections, like is going on in our primary right now. It gets funneled right directly to candidates who do what? Support choice, because then they'll go up to the state and they'll create a bill that will help them push school choice, right? Okay. So why, if you really cared about kids, if you really wanted kids to get out of bad public schools, would you turn around and take $8 or $9 million in a year and fund candidates to write policy? I'm just curious.
Well,
You have an answer
I'll
for
play
that one?
devil's advocate there. I'll play devil's advocate because we live in a constitutional democracy or a representative democracy, and how you make long-term change in a government is that you support candidates who are committed to your goals.
Okay, fair enough.
So what's the retort to that?
Well, it seems to me like, think about the nonprofits that we have that do. My mother works with Salvation Army. She has worked with Salvation Army for years and years and years. Salvation Army actually takes donations and they go out and they help the poor. Salvation Army doesn't pay a lobbyist to go up to the state and lobby for them to have laws that will help the poor. They just literally, and have been for hundreds of years, helping poor people. They take those donations and go, oh, look here, I'm going to create this program that will help poor people, or I'm going to give it directly to a house that will help poor people. That's how advocacy is done. This notion that we have to write laws to make that happen is probably part of the propaganda that we've been fed over the years by the people who want power. Because and let me play conspiracy theorist for you.
Okay.
So there were two major things that happened in the Supreme Court this week. One of them happened yesterday, and that was the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And now the states, and when that I say that, it means that because lots of people don't understand what that means. It means that the federal government doesn't decide abortion issues anymore. It means states decide,
it
which
actually
is
means
federalism.
Democracy.
It's federalism.
Yeah, it's a representative democracy. Everybody now gets to vote on whether it happens.
But right. So how long has it been telegraphed or leaked that this was coming?
2 months.
Okay.
Yeah, a month.
So do you know what happened on, I believe it was Tuesday. Do you know something else that the Supreme Court did on Tuesday?
Yeah, the Supreme Court opened the lines up to say that governments have to fund, if they're going to fund, they can give money to religious institutions.
So now they've said that states have to make sure that if you're going to give government money to a non-sectarian school, that you're also, or a sectarian school, you're also going to have to give it to a non-sectarian school, which means that government money will now go into a private institution and it's sponsored by the state. Now, let me play devil's advocate. So why would RV Wade come out after that thing on Tuesday? My argument for you is that thing that happened on Tuesday is the biggest thing to happen ever. Because if you want a one world government, and there are lots of us Republicans who are actually conspiracy theory enough to believe Klaus Schwab when he says, you will have nothing and be happy with it. And the World Economic Forum that's telling us we're going to have a one world government. So there are lots of us that actually believe this kind of thing. So if you're going to have a one world government, wouldn't it be fair to say that one way to get there is by having a one world schoolhouse?
Yes, and I think that you would actually see that model being infiltrated and expanded throughout the country through what they call community schools.
And
Right?
community schools for sure.
Yeah, whole child, whole school, whole community.
But my
And-
whole argument is once that public money goes into these private schools and now it's a public school, voila, we have the one world school. And now we're propagandized even more than we already are to believe that we'll be happy owning nothing.
Yep. And we'll be happy sending our kids to, schools that hey, I want to add to your, okay, first of all, I want to say this conspiracy, just if you look it up, the only thing that means is conspiracy. It says a plan to do something nefarious. Literally, that's it. So you can be charged and convicted of criminal conspiracy in court. A theory is actually misnamed in the term. A theory is something that's been proven. You have a hypothesis, but when they, and we can argue this, but when they talk about the theory of evolution, when they say the word theory, they're not saying that has yet to be proven. They're saying it has been proven. Okay, so a theory is something's been proven. It has evidence to back it up. It's generally accepted. The WEF exists. They've said that what they're going to do. That's the thing. But I want to add to this hypothesis. We'll put it that way, which I think is in the midst of COVID in Oklahoma, they passed a bill. If you remember, there's a big fight over masking.
Yes.
And the Senate passed a bill that said that schools could not force kids to mask.
Yes, correct. Right?
The governor signed it and it went into effect. And then the health apparatus of the state and outside influences came in and filed a lawsuit. And within that lawsuit, there was an injunction given. Do you know what the legal reasoning behind that injunction was? That forced that it's kind of confusing, but what the injunction did was said that basically it said that school districts could mask their students or force their students to mask if they wanted to. The legal theory or the legal reasoning given under that injunction was this. The judge said that she could not allow the law to continue because it did not treat public and private schools the same. I spoke with somebody who's been very deep in the fight to the point of them calling the school choice bill their bill. I brought that up in one of my first conversations with this person, and they did this when I'm explaining it. I said, this is concerning because this seems, I'm not sure why, but it seems like this is laying the legal groundwork for school choice. And he did this. He goes, but as I was saying that, what I was saying was, I think they lost it on purpose. I think the governor and his administration and his attorney general lost it on purpose, because I read the brief. I'm not a lawyer, but I've read a lot of legal stuff and I know language and I know argument. It seemed like they wanted to lose that. And this is right when the school choice thing was starting to ramp up, right? And they were using COVID and the CRT thing to push school choice. And this man, he looks at me and goes, like, yes, that's what we want. Aren't you for school choice? and I at that point I was not very well versed on school choice. It sounded great as it
Yes.
does, but when you unpack all of this mess, when you take the umbrella off and you go, all right, what's in here? And you pull out these little things, you get to finding out that, hey, at least we should be able to ask questions without being called a racist.
Correct. Or I was called, let's see, I have been called a privileged white woman who doesn't care about kids because I don't want a voucher system. And I'm going to get into jump off onto that for just a second because I know we're going to have to go here in a minute or people aren't going to watch the whole thing. But LBJ declared a war on poverty in 1964. And I read an argument that was done by an independent think tank. They're not attached to the Carnegies or the Rockefellers or anybody. And they basically went back and looked, and they came up with some kind of $70 billion have been used in the desire to keep people out of poverty or to, implement anti-poverty programs. It's just exactly what you said. You said concept creep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So concept creep also applies to this very same thing. What's a poor person? When I was a kid, my ex-husband's grandmother lived in a little home in Antlers, Oklahoma, where it was one of the slat homes, where they use the plaster over the slats and then they just put, wallpaper over that. You could literally see in places in her home, places where the plaster cracked and sunlight was coming through her house. Okay. Mm-hmm. They had one clawfoot bathtub in a bathroom that was kind of hanging off on the end. And every time we would go, Mammy, as she was called, would show me all the things that she got from the government office, the, free cheese and the, that kind of stuff. Okay. So that was back in 1982 or 3. So now what is a poor person? Poor person has a cell phone. Poor person has air conditioning. Poor person, a lot of the times, has a brand new car because you have to have a car to get to work and you might as well just get a brand new one, right? And the state will subsidize so many things anymore. So my argument in anymore is what really even makes a poor person? We have concept creep on the idea of poor to the fact that and they want concept creep. They want to increase that. I mean, for example, in HB 1647, which was the school voucher bill from this last year, anybody that was their minimum requirement was 300% within poverty level.
Okay, so explain this. Say that again.
You qualified for the program if your household income was within 300% of the poverty level. Well, the poverty level in the state is somewhere around, I think it's $28,000 or $32,000 a year, something like that. So think about who all qualifies as, poverty essentially, or qualifies
so 300% higher low.
Higher.
So
right.
300% higher than $32,000.
Well, whatever the level of poverty was.
Right. So if it's the last I remember national, it was the poverty is sitting around 28 or something like that. But let's just say, but you can do 300%.
Yeah, and qualify for that program. And their whole argument is, but this is because I can't tell you the number of times people who have said school, and I will say people, meaning school choice leaders in the state, have said to me, well, you're against poor people then. You just don't want poor people to have options. Well, maybe we're not even talking about what a poor person is. Have you ever been to India? Do you know what a poor person really is? A poor person plays in a poop river outside of a corrugated tin shack and rides a bicycle and maybe gets to eat, 4 or 5 times a week. This idea that we have poor people in America, there are people who literally need to have help from one situation to another. But that's why private nonprofits were established, and that's why churches were important, was because that's where people could go to get help. But what we've done is with this creep, like you've been talking about, it's like mission creep in the military. It's that same kind of thing. Now we've just blown it up to saying, well, we can make it for everybody now, but it's really just for poor people. I mean, it's extremely disingenuous, and why people aren't understanding this. Well, I know why. And I could go on, and I hate to go on, but I'm a homeschool mom, and I got 4 kids through homeschool. And I have noticed that what's happened with the EPIC situation, when EPIC started the online schooling where you could school at home, being subsidized by the state. So don't forget, that was how that worked, right? Was that you got state money to then be able to school your kid at home. Well, I never took no homeschooler I ever knew took any kind of state money to homeschool their kids. We just did it on our budget. We didn't go on vacations. We didn't live extravagantly. All my cars are old and they're paid for. I mean, did these things to live within our means and still be able to have control over the education of my children. So what's ended up happening with the EPIC situation is we're literally subsidizing people to learn at home, which I think is fine, but they believe that that's homeschooling. These people have gone into homeschooling co-ops and have caused problems because a lot of these kids aren't suited for being around other kids. They're disruptive in homeschool co-ops. They're literally changing the fabric of homeschooling just by the way we have it. And I see it really sincerely almost wiping out homeschool if they start giving vouchers to homeschoolers, because there are very few of us who want to do the hard things. Most people don't want to do the hard things. They just want the government to incentivize them to do something, and then they're all good with it, right? But there are a few of us who are going to actually do things on our own and make a budget and have to stick with it in order to do that. So, my argument for all of this is that it's literally meant to degrade and ruin those private entities that were keeping kids out of the system.
Well, and we also, I just want to make this point that as you get transparency in public schools because it's the law.
Yes.
Private entities, 501c3s, 501bs, whatever you want to say, are not required to give over their donor names. You see this a lot in the university model, which is what this is mimicking, because it gets state funding, federal funding. The universities do. That's what makes them universities and not colleges, right? But they also have the ability to receive private donations, and those donations can be anonymous. And so if you want to take this into the woke argument about, because what I cannot stand, what I will not abide by, is everyone coming in and saying that school choice is the cure for queer theory, for critical race theory. No, because Google just moved into Oklahoma. And if you don't think that they aren't going to spread their money around to schools around them to build that building, that's paupers for this, is pennies for them, to say, but hey, we'll even give you our iPads or our tablets to you run your data. We'll run data for the state.
Right.
We'll do all of that. Let us have it. They'll monetize your data. See, they're getting much more on their investment. And this is what I hate about the term, the money follows the child.
Yeah.
Because you're sticking a price tag on the head of that child that's depreciating day by day. And so
that's a good point.
It is, because for every day
that
the child has the price tag on, they become less expensive. That's why do you think they're going after early childhood education? Okay, because that's when the kid is most valuable. It's also when they're most impressionable.
Yeah.
It's also when they are more likely to trust you.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
putting a price, monetizing a child as a means of incentivizing, if you want to talk about stacked incentives. Okay, I will give up the term slippery slope. Let's use the term stacked incentives. If you want to talk about, we're going to stack our way into the oblivion. If we're going to go, up into the sun and have our wings melt and fall to the ground here, the Tower of Babel, if you want to take it at that, it's, if you want to monetize those kids to the point that they become more valuable to people that want to push a certain ideology in order to make them unthinking, kids who can't read, who can't spell, who can't do their own math, 2 + 2 = 5, all this stuff, they're going to do that.
Yeah.
And so I will answer my own question from earlier that I asked, which is this: how can freedom from government schools be defined as injecting government money into private schools? The answer is it cannot. It cannot. Because it's not your money, because they have it. If you want to make it your money, let's pass laws that says they can't take it. But as long as they take it, they've got it. And that's it. And then it becomes their money and they're giving it back to you and saying, look, ain't this great? Now take it and put it in this school. That just so happens to be a school that cannot, that does not have to tell you what their curriculum is, where their donors are coming from, who's paying for it, and what their agenda is. And they'll make you sign an NDA that says you can't talk bad about them. What Jenni is saying here is right. And I will ask Jenni to come on, and I will ask any school choice advocate, come here, talk to me. I will listen to you, convince me, tell me I'm wrong. But the woke way of dealing with an argument is to not argue. That's it. That's why Ibram Kendi won't go on with Coleman Hughes. It's why they won't argue with you.
Yeah.
And so I just challenge everybody to think. That's all. And what Jenni's saying here, and I'm going to have her back. But again, I will bring people on who disagree with me. I will bring people on who disagree with Jenni. And you can call me names if you want. I don't care. Call me names. But come on and disagree and let's have a conversation. I brought Jenni here because I think that she has she has a knowledge that predates the last 3 years. Okay. And this is what we also must understand, is that we're on a ticking time clock. And people who have the institutional memory that Jenni has, and that other leaders who fought this fight against Common Core, against No Child Left Behind, against Race to the Top, against all these things for these years, we're going to lose them. And then once they're gone, where are we going to get it from? Because it's being erased from the internet. And you can go back and look at that. I mean, there are things like that that are happening. So Jenni, I want to give you the final word. I want you to give us a brass tacks. Why, take as long as you want. Why is it okay to have issues with school choice? Why? Why?
Well, because it's deliberately couched in a way so to make it unarguable. You either are for school choice or you aren't, and there's no definition of exactly what that is. And
let me ask you a better question.
Okay.
Give me, and that's my fault. I am a novice interviewer. I'm getting there, and everybody here knows that, and I have no problem saying it, but I'm learning. Here's a better question for you. Give me your top 3 policy reasons why school choice should give people pause.
Well, number one, we're not sure exactly what that is. It's too broad of a term. So in terms of policy, it could be anything. And we never wanted to get into a situation where a government has a wide open, well, but this is school choice. Well, but how do you know? Because we haven't even really defined what that is. So, and I think that, and I'm going to deviate you from your question just a little bit, because I think, the second thing here, and I'll make a second thing. So if we're going to stick to vouchers, let's just stick to vouchers. You can't tell me, your argument can't be that government schools suck, essentially, and we need to get all kids out of them, but we need to take the government money that has initially caused the school to suck in the first place, because we won't make schools accountable for them, and then move it over with the child to a private school where we're not going to make them accountable for it. And then we're going to end up having the same situation that we had before. And number three, all we have to do is look at Epic to find out exactly what's going on. I think in the last week, it's been found that, Epic's founders have been put in jail. They've been released on their own recognizance, but they've been charged with all kinds of things, with embezzlement of millions and millions and millions of dollars. That's taxpayer dollars that followed the child, right, to this school. And now all of a sudden we're having to figure out how we can claw back all these millions and millions and millions of dollars that weren't appropriately accounted for in the first place under the umbrella of school choice. Because do not forget, this was a school choice. Epic charter schools fall under the umbrella of school choice. So if we're not having any accountability in the first place on state money, and we're somehow going to put that state money into a private solution where you just said there are private donors to a private solution, there are private, now what? Where did that money go? So it's a two-pronged problem then, isn't it? How are we going to get accountability? Because it's a private solution. Well, then you have to force the private solution to come up with that accountability. And now all of a sudden that private solution isn't a private solution, it's a public solution, just like we had before.
Right.
So there you go.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And if it's not right, somebody tell me how it's not right. More than just don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, which is what I always hear, or more than just, the talking points. That's what I want to understand. And so again, I invite anybody else to come on and take Jenni's spot right here, or come on with Jenni and I'll mediate and I'll stay out of it and you can talk to her. But the thing about this is, at brass tacks, let's just take it all the way down to ground level. Always question things that people tell you that you shouldn't question. If you find yourself wrong, admit it, but never stop questioning it. That's what this country was literally built on. They say it's about taxes. It wasn't about taxes as much as it was the ability to question the taxes, right? It was the no taxation without representation, right? It wasn't about the ability. Okay, even the federal government started taxing people for wars and things like that at the very early points. They taxed the states taxed the people, they got the treasury. It was no taxation without the ability to question the tax.
Correct.
And that's what we have to come back to here, because we're very, very close to being able to not ask the questions. Right now, it's just a social pejorative. It's just a social thing that you will experience, a social downgrade, if you will. That, okay, you question school choice, you're not a conservative, you're a bad person, right? And you will pay some kind of price for that. But the slope is slippery. Yeah. And the incentives do stack in that direction. Yeah. And so just keep asking questions. Jenni, thank you so much for being here. How can we find you on social media, on the internet? Where can we find you?
Well, we're Reclaim Oklahoma Parent Empowerment on Facebook. So you can find us on Facebook. You can search us on Instagram because I don't remember. I think Rope Okay, something
Okay.
like that on Instagram. It's always a variation of that. And we're on Twitter as well. We're on we have a Rumble channel, we have a YouTube channel, so you can look up all of these kinds of things. Our website is www.rope2, so ROPE, the number 2, .org. So, you know, just, and we try to write and put things up there. So, you know, but
Well,
thank
and,
you, Mark. I really appreciate you talk. I mean, I love to hear you talk because I'm sick of, this is how we think in America,
yeah,
right here. We
Yeah.
need to be thinking out here, not here, out here. So I
Yeah.
just thank you for thinking.
Well, I try. I'm not always the best at it, but that's the point, isn't it? So I have to say this too. If you all enjoyed this conversation, please like and subscribe to the channel. Share this out. Again, knowledge and conversation is how you get to the source of problems. So let's keep asking the questions, and let's keep having the conversation. Okay, thank you all so much, and we'll see you later. Just